In the early game of American football, one of the biggest issues was how do you keep air inside the ball? The balls were not developed the same way they are today, and you had to figure out how do you get that air in there? We're going to take a study of that today with our friend Timothy P. Brown of footballarchaeology.com. Tim, welcome back to the Pigpen.
Hey, Darren. Good to see you, and hopefully this episode will pump up your ratings.
I hope it does. I'm pumped up for this. I can tell you that. Now, you wrote a recent tidbit, as like we just alluded to, titled "Inflating Footballs: The Adjacent, Possible, and Progress." And what can you tell us about this story, Tim?
Yeah, so there's kind of like just the basic how did footballs get inflated stories, and then I kind of went off on this adjacent possible, you know, issue, which I think is pretty cool concept. But anyways, so when football began, we've gone through stages where initially the ball was, the bladder was just a pig's bladder or sheep's bladder, depending at the time. But anyway, some animal bladder, and they just, there was like a stem on it that they blew into it. They put just like you blow up a balloon. You put it in your mouth and you blow the thing up, and then you tie it off. You fold it over. There are different techniques for how you kept the air in there, but eventually it leaked out. And so
If
then
if
they
if, if
they
you like to put rotten animal parts in your mouth,
yeah.
that's the job for you, right?
Well, and in fact, you know, the guy who invented the rubberized or vulcanized bladder, supposedly his wife died from blowing up one of those balls
Ooh.
because so anyways, uh, so then they started, in part because of that danger, they started using like kind of what you'd think of as a bicycle pump. I mean, there's a kind of a pump. It almost looked like the old kinds kind of look like on old cartoons when they'd be spraying bugs,
Hmm.
uh, you know, trying to get the, whatever insecticides up in the air. But it was, kind of a pumping action little thing that they insert into this nozzle. Then they finally went to, what we think of as valve. They had the valve that was initially the valves were Schrader valves, so they were basically the same kind of thing as on a car or on a bicycle, and so longer stem, and but it kept the air in, but it was still kind of awkward yet, and throughout all that process, when the ball got inflated, you had to unlace it um, to get at it to inflate it. So then they came up with this flatter valve that sat flush with the top of the bladder. Okay, and so it was a valve kind of shaped like little markers you use on golf greens to for where your ball is. It was kind of that kind of a structure. It kind of looked like that, and so I had always thought because that came out in like 23, 24, and by 26 everybody had balls that you could inflate right through the leather. The big innovation was you no longer had to unlace the ball in order to inflate it because you always had to before. So I thought when they'd come out with that valve that they'd immediately gone to that level, but it actually took 2 years. So in 24, Spalding invents a ball with this flat, kind of valve, but you still had to unlace it in order to pump it up, to connect the little thingy and pump it. And I only know that because I ended up seeing it in an old catalog. So I bought the catalog so they would have a picture, and so that's what's led to the tidbit. So it's just one of those things where I just there's we always talk about football as you know the game repeats itself, and if everybody steals ideas from other people, and that's true, but that's true pretty much in everything we do. Almost all the vast majority of innovations come from small improvements, iterative little improvements over whatever the previous process was. You got a better player, you got a slightly different player, so you try to use them differently, and so you innovate a new style of play. um, or you just come up with a kind of a cool idea. But most things are just real small steps. And so there's a concept in evolutionary biology called the adjacent possible, which just, my analogy for it is, in evolution, you take small steps for the most part. And so that's why wolves didn't become dachshunds overnight. There were lots of little steps to get there. And so then this particular example is just one where looking back, we can see it and say, well, why didn't they just go right to the valve going through the ball, through the leather? But either there was the technology wasn't quite there, or they just didn't think about it, you know, because I mean, it's so obvious, but it took them 2 years to figure out how to do it, you know, and it just, again, it's just one of those things. I find those kinds of things fascinating. Um, but eventually, we got to the point where, um, you know, the ball works like it has for about 100 years. You got that little rubber button, and you insert the needle. Though it took a while for those needles to come along too. There was, for a while when those balls first came out, like in the later 20s, a lot of times, companies, the ball manufacturers would supply a little cap that would go over, it's like kind of like the cap that you screw on your car tire on the nozzle, but they were flat. And so you put that on so that dirt and water and stuff didn't get into the little nozzle, right? It's just one of those things you don't think about, but
Right.
that's the best solution that they could come up with at the time, but just, when's the last time you picked up a football that had a little cap over the nozzle? Yeah.
Yeah, never, never.
Yeah.
But
So,
I can tell you that the gentleman that I worked with for years and years, I was a referee, he was the umpire, and we worked on the same crew for probably 15, 20 years. Uh, he would, the umpire always checks the balls in high school football. I'm not sure if it does it at other levels. So the teams would bring the balls to the locker room, however, whatever balls they want to use. We'd have to test them, make sure they're the right pressure. And my umpire, Dick Zocchi is his name. He he got so disappointed when the balls would come in and they'd be not enough pressure in them or too much pressure. So he went out and he bought one of those little things, like you said, the little canister where you pump from the end, and he had the couple extra needles and everything. And he felt so bad because usually they'd have the kids bringing the balls, and these kids are probably eighth grade or something bringing the balls, and he'd check in as like 9 pounds, and well, you got to get up, I got to get this up to 12 and a half. So he'd pump the thing up for them and make them all legal. And if they had too much pressure, he let it out. So those are still used, at least
yeah.
in 2016, the last time I worked a football game as an official.
Yeah.
The other thing is when you're talking about 1924, 1925, that we had Jeff Payne and I had an interesting part in our book Marooned, where the gentleman that sold the footballs and most of the equipment to the Pottsville Maroons would put together a new football every single game. They didn't come out of the box like they do now. He would have to, put the bladder in and sew it up and everything like that. So exactly what you're saying. Yeah, that was definitely happening in 1924, 1925.
Yeah. Well, it's actually I believe it was in 1924. I kind of base this on a 24-25 Spalding's catalog. And it was either in that one or in the 26, where some of the language is like, the ball is shipped with laces and bladder, right? So that would have been the earlier version. So if you got the ball under the Christmas tree, you had to figure out how to stuff that bladder in there, how to inflate it, and they
Some
a lot of
assembly required.
yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, it's one of those. That's a great line because it's one of those things we don't even think about. Obviously, the ball's ready to go, but it wasn't always so.
Hey, just put a couple pounds of pressure in it and you're out throwing it in the front yard.
Yeah, yeah. So, well, and there's old stories about kids who um, would basically they had some kind of little device where they would blow up the ball. They'd put the nozzle, when it was still just the kind of rubber nozzle. They'd put it over a car tire and then press the little pin in the car tire to let air out. So, whoever's car happened to be on the street, they basically steal air from, their neighbors' tires and stuff.
And then they moved on to siphoning gas out once they started
Yeah.
driving themselves.
Those
So
little criminals.
that is a very interesting aspect of early football, Tim, that we don't think about in today's modern football. And you do this a lot in your tidbits and on your site. Maybe you could tell us a little bit how people can partake in this.
Yeah, easiest thing is just go to footballarchaeology.com. It's a Substack site. You can subscribe, which means you'll get an email every time that I send out a new story. You can also just follow, which allows you to kind of more easily track, from within the site. I've now got a new YouTube channel. It's just got, a handful of different items on there. But anyways, lots of ways to figure it out. Just footballarchaeology.com, and one way or another, you'll get there.
All right. Well, Tim, we really appreciate you coming on this week and talking about this football of antiquity. And we'd love to talk to you again next week.
Very good. Talk soon.
That's all the football history we have today, folks. Join us back tomorrow for more of your football history. We invite you to check out our website, pigskindispatch.com, not only to see the daily football history, but to experience positive football with our many articles on the good people of the game, as well as our own football comic strip, Cleat Marks Comics. Pigskindispatch.com is also on social media outlets, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and don't forget the Pigskin Dispatch YouTube channel to get all of your positive football news and history. Special thanks to the talents of Mike and Gene Monroe, as well as Jason Neff for letting us use their music during our podcast.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.